Welcome everyone to Global Optimistic Futures. Our panel of experts will take us through a journey of how we can think about the future, how we can think about the future together, and how our training as science fiction fans helps us think in ways that will help us build an optimistic future, an upbeat future, one that we can look forward to being a part of. So let's get started and meet our panel. Janet, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Janet O'Sullivan. I'm a long-term science fiction, fantasy and horror fan. I'm a previous chair of Octagon, and I do the social media management for Octagon at the moment. And I'm very much looking forward to this.
Oisín.
Sorry. My name is Oisín McGann. I'm a writer and illustrator. I write for children and young people mostly, everything from picture books up to novels. And over the last few years, my work has had environmental themes. My latest book is a short, hopeful guide to climate change aimed at 10-year-olds and upwards, including adults. So it's an increasing influence on my writing. But that was my first non-fiction book.
Francesco.
I'm Francesco Verso from Italy. I am a science fiction writer and editor of future fiction. I've wrote one of the first solar punk novels called I Camminatori, The Walkers, and I've edited one of the first international solar punk anthologies together with this man down here, Fabio Fernandes from Brazil. And so I'm also the creative director of the Fishing Fortress Science Fiction Academy in Chongqing in China. And I'm also a panelist, a public speaker, and let's say advocate for the solar punk movement.
Excellent. Well, let's hear from your partner, Fabio. And unmute yourself, sir.
Sorry about that. My name is Fabio Fernandes. I am a Brazilian science fiction writer, currently living in Rome. And I've also acted as a translator and translated into Brazilian Portuguese several science fiction novels like Neuromancer, Foundation, 2001, Ancillary Justice, and many others. And I co-edited the Solar Punk anthology with Francesco, and I also translated what is claimed to be the first global solar punk anthology, a Brazilian solar punk anthology. I translated to English to World Weaver Press publishing. And right now I just launched this collection of stories called Love and Archaeology by a publishing house from Scotland, Luna Press Publishing. And right now I'm switching from cyberpunk and steampunk to solar punk.
Excellent. Or we have a wonderful group of people. I guess I should mention that I write speculative fiction. I have a little book that I can wave around to, but it's not solar punk or cyberpunk, but it's hopeful. So we at least all have a shared attitude here today. So let's just jump in because we only have our 50 minutes to play with. So when I'm just going to go around and ask people to give their perspectives, but if we're talking about a global future, are we thinking of creating a vision for the planet as a whole, or are we thinking that each little region and nation is going to come up with their vision? And then, okay, how are we going to bring that together to create the future? So we need to create vision, and then we need to go into the future. And how are we going to deal with the inevitable conflicts between the various visions? Who's going to get to decide? And can we possibly have an optimistic view of resolving such conflicts? So I'm going to be really mean and start with people who are already thinking about it. Francesco?
Oh, okay. Well, for me, the problem is that for a very long time, let's say for at least 80 years, the very idea of the future and the very idea of imagining the future has been in the hands of one culture and one market and basically one language and one economic system. And so this point of view has totally taken the imagination of the rest of the world. If you consider that mainly 50% of what is on the shelves of any bookstore in the world is translated from English, and that has overshadowed all the local communities, all the local markets of writers and readers, then you have a very unbalanced and biased perception of what is the future. So I think that the first step in order to understand what imagination could be in other countries, in other continents, in other cultures, is to decolonize the future and decolonize the imagination. So allowing the books that are written in other languages to flow from one language to the other, and not always being bridged by the English language. Just to mention a study made by the Rochester University some years ago, the number of books that have been translated in the US normally every year is 3%. And in that 3% are included all the languages of the world. While on the other side, it's probably 60%, 70% for English in science fiction to the local language. And this grip of the US and UK imagination over the world is kind of imposing a view of the future, a view of the science fiction, a view of the storytelling. And as I have in experiences in other countries, mainly in China or also with Fabio in Brazil, there are other storytellings, there are other visions, there are other heroes, there are other ways to conceive the reality and the future. So I think that the first step is to understand that we need a multiple vision, we need dialogue, and most of all, we need translations.
That's a wonderful point. Oisín, you want to chime in here on this topic of how can we discuss and develop a vision for the future?
I mean, I think my focus on this is because I work with young people and trying to communicate that subject is trying to give a personal, provoke a personal connection to a topic that feels like it's too large and distant and large scale. And I think although we haven't been short of information on it for a very long, you know, with loads of information to deal with over a very long time, but it's very hard to connect to something that feels like it's theoretical or too far away. And I think it doesn't necessarily restrict to children. I think if you look at a lot of the communication around the subject, a lot of it comes from academic circles. And if your communication is based on what, you know, on the academic world, then you're used to speaking to people who want to be there and are interested in the subject, when actually we have a kind of a shortage of communication, although it's getting better, to create empathy with people who are being affected by it, but also to kind of inspire an interest in it. And that's like, I kind of very much view my challenge as to engage people in the subject. So a lot of my writing where I am dealing with climate change is to get people's interest first and convey facts second, to get a kind of emotional connection rather than intellectual one. We tend to think we're very rational beings, but we're not. We're emotional beings first. And therefore we need to find ways to connect to the subject on an emotional basis. And that means connecting with people who are not like us, you know, connecting people who are on the far side of the world from different cultures. And one of the things about writing for children is by definition, I'm writing for an audience quite often, depending on the book, who are not like me. I have to find ways of communicating ideas to engage minds that are either younger than mine or from different places. And I think we need to, I think that's where science fiction and speculative fiction have a real strength in that they can convey ideas, they can convey stuff in a way that's engaging, rather than just delivering information and thinking that's the job done. I've told you what the problem is, now do something about it. So I think that's the emotional engagement. That's where the storytelling really comes in, and that's its strength. And whether that's, you know, connecting with people who, you know, are in different places, are being affected by different things, or simply connecting with people who aren't interested in the subject, but you want to get them interested, you want to give them a reason to be interested, then that's where storytelling really has its strength.
Those are wonderful, wonderful points you've made. Janet.
I'm a communications professional. That's my trade. That's what I studied in. I went back to college in the last decade and got a new degree. And yes, I very much agree that what we call science communication, it can be very hard to explain concepts and break them down to people, and we get too caught up in the big things. But in terms of the points I made earlier about language, I was very lucky that at a young age I read Harry Harrison's books, about the Murder, Death World, Murder Planet books, but also Stainless Steel Rat, because in the Stainless Steel Rat, in the future, English isn't what people speak, and it's not Russian either. That people decided collectively that they would speak a common language to each other, and it would be Esperanto, which was an artificial language which was created from all the languages of the world. And the idea was that nobody's native tongue was the way that we would all communicate to each other, so that no concepts would be weighed or skewed towards one particular culture. And I think that's important as we go forward, that how do we have conversations, how do we talk about concepts, and very much so the cultural concept around changing things in terms of climate change. A lot of it is skewed towards the negative things that's happening in Western economy, with what's now hyper-capitalism, and with carbon taxes and carbon credits. And we see things around countries which are considered third world nations, which are third world nations because, quite frankly, their countries' natural resources were pillaged by other Western countries. But why should we be looking at a situation where carbon taxes are being bought and sold like a commodity? Why are we looking at taking those countries and cultures and saying, you're not allowed to develop because this other part of the globe is so developed? And it's interesting that we may have to go back and say that Western culture and hyper-capitalism is never going to solve this. And I don't think it is. What I find really interesting in any of the hope punk, solar punk books that I read, where a better world is built after an apocalypse, and it's not usually the trend has been for viral apocalypses. There's one particular set of books called The Colony. It's a lot of flu that wipes out a lot of the population, but you're still looking at every time there's that hope punk or solar punk, there's usually a catastrophe that has already taken down hyper-capitalism. So we don't have to do that. So we don't have to find a way to say all of these big companies that are producing plastics at a ridiculous rate, in a way that, you know, can't ever be broken down or dealt with. I'm 47. I remember when the majority of the bottles and jars that come into the house were glass. It's not that long ago, when we didn't have plastic shrink wrap on everything. When you went to the butcher's, you had butcher's paper. You know, that these were the sustainable way that we consumed what we needed to, and these items were reusable and recyclable. And then, as we've seen over the last 30 years, all of these plastics come in. And in some ways, I think we need to go backwards to that type of sustainability. And can we do that? And can we have those conversations? And can we say, if the solutions aren't to be found within Western hyper-capitalist societies, then where are they? And if somebody in Brazil finds something which is revolutionary, or if cold fusion gets discovered somewhere which isn't a Western power, will we hear of it? Or if it does get discovered in the Western power, will it be suppressed? You know, there's all these people with different modes of living and different ways of living. And I don't necessarily think, with the predominance of Western stories out there, and we need to find new ways of looking at it. And that's why I think the bit of books that are translated. And you'd think, given the type of age that we're in, that we should be able to access way more authors globally. Like, ebooks are brilliant, but then again, the majority place where people will buy most of their ebooks is the big Amazon, and that's where people will get the majority of their books still, if you're talking the ebook market. So where it may be easier to get books electronically, it is still very hard to get books from different authors and different cultures as a result. Do I think it's possible for things to be turned around in my lifetime? I don't know. I'm really hopeful. I would like to think that we could, but can we communicate that possibility, and can we get those that make the laws that we need to put the brakes on hyper-capitalism? Because that's what societies that are socialists are meant to do. Our politicians are meant to regulate the machine so it doesn't trample us over, and that's not happening. So I'm really interested to see what the others think on this.
It's fascinating. We're getting some wonderful complexities just among the few people we've talked to so far, and I think Fabio has run into some technical difficulties, so we will lambaste him with questions when he reappears.
Well, Fabio told me he has a severe connection problem, so he might not get back. He apologizes, and yeah,
we'll hope to see him on the Discord after. That might well work for him, because I was really looking forward to hearing his point of view. I've been reading up on both of you guys. So, well, to go from the big picture to the smallest picture, you know, the past year and a half, 2 years has been rough for everybody. It's been very easy to fall into kind of gloom and doom and the world is ending kind of sensations within ourselves. So, okay, I'm going to get up close and personal. What are you doing personally to kind of maintain your hope for the future? A practical thing that you do, an idea that you hold on to, a work effort that you're making that is helping you connect to the future you envision, and to that hopeful feeling that allows you to move forward and to see the future as a good place and not a scary one. But I'll mix up the order and ask Oisín first.
Well, I mean, it's something that's very important to me, because I think you have to tailor the message to the audience. So on one hand, if you're kind of a very powerful politician and you have the ability to change policy and to affect your own nation or even those, even other nations, then I think you should be having nightmares about what's coming. On the other hand, if you're talking to kids, there's no point saying, you know, you have to vote a certain way, or you have to change a certain policy, or you have to kind of, you know, recycle their plastic better. You have to give them hope for the future, and you have to make them feel like they're part of something. I think sometimes teenagers in particular at the moment feel like this has been dumped on them, that they are now facing a kind of an uncertain and frightening future. And I think that really is something that we are conscious of. I think Liza Grady, Thunberg are brilliant, but I think they're kind of a weapon that should be aimed at the powerful, and that, you know, when you're talking to kids and young people, you have to be a bit more positive and you have to be a bit more hopeful. One of the simplest things that two of the main points that I make when I'm talking to kids is, first of all, this is not an asteroid or a super volcano. This is something that we're doing. We are doing to the planet ourselves. That means we have an influence over it. It gives us the power to do something about it. And the other thing is that this is, for the first time, as we are thinking as a species for the good of our planet. And it's a slow process, and it's awkward, and not everybody's getting involved. But it is fast becoming the biggest movement the world has ever seen. And it is an exciting thing to be part of. You know, so everybody has a different way of getting involved. And I always think that people should, you know, what would you do anyway? What are your passions? You know, everything that you do is connected to the earth. I mean, I'm looking at a computer that's everything, every part of that computer came from the earth. It's sitting on a wooden platform. It's on a wooden desk. You know, the walls around me, everything came from the earth. Every aspect of my life is connected to the world, and connects me to different parts of the world, not just kind of the place that's around me. And I'm always looking for a way to make this subject personal. And if you think about our atmosphere is a very thin, delicate thing. We tend to look up into the sky and think it's endless, but actually it's, you know, the breathable part of our atmosphere is only 8 kilometers deep. And if you were to look at a globe, that's literally the thickness of the paper wrapped around the globe. You know, it is a very thin, delicate thing. And it is, we tend to think of the environment as something that's out there. It's trees or rivers or mountains. But every breath you take in is connecting you to the environment. So it's in a very intimate relationship we have with our world. We tend not to think of it that way because we're so used to it being there. So I'm always trying to kind of connect people with the fact that we're not separate from nature. We are part of nature. It's having an effect on us all the time. We can't survive without it. literally for more than a few seconds. But we also have an influence on it. Every movement in your life, everything you change or everything you do has threads that's connecting you to the rest of the world. And it can feel like you can't do anything on your own, but you're never on your own. You're one of billions. And that when we make decisions together on a small, like on a large scale, we have an effect. And a really simple example of that is masks, wearing masks during a pandemic. It doesn't feel like you're doing much, but the more you wear it, the more possibility that you're actually helping save a life. So it's small acts like that on a very large scale that can feel insignificant and feel futile sometimes, but they can have an effect. So I'm always trying to find that means of making it feel personal while also having a big effect.
Wonderful. So, Francesco?
Last year in June, right in the middle of the first wave of the pandemic, we felt so separated, divided, lonely. I'm talking about the science fiction community that used to gather in many conventions in many places. I'm thinking about Italy, I'm thinking about Europe, I'm thinking about even, the Worldcon or these other kind of events. And I had the opportunity to work together with Fabio and with Ana Ruscia and with other people from Brazil, and we launched this idea of a FutureCon. And in September, it was one of the first online gathering where we put together 65 people, 55 guests from more than 25 countries. Many of these writers never participated into a convention because they couldn't get a visa, because they couldn't get a flight, because they didn't have the money to participate to a physical convention. So this was our gift to the science fiction community, because before the pandemic, the Zoom and Google Meet and all these tools were just, not so necessary. It was a business tool that we didn't really use because we could actually take a train or take a car or take a flight, the most fortunate of us. So this was a way of fight back or try to be resilient in the face of the worst case scenario that we could actually possibly imagine, being stuck in our houses and not being able to gather, to communicate, to share, to join the other panelists or friends or readers and authors and everything. So I think this was in a small event, but the fact that we managed to run it in 5 people and that we had no paywall at all, it was all free. It was communication on solar punk, on climate change, on all the local science fiction communities which people never heard about, like Turkish science fiction, like Chilean science fiction, like Russian contemporary science fiction, like Chinese science fiction, like Indian science fiction, from many, many countries. And all these panels are still available on YouTube, as long as YouTube will last. And so I think is a kind of testimony of the fact that science fiction can find solutions. At least the community, we can leverage that, and we can fight back, and we can try to, build networks of positive energy and be persistent and continue to do so, because we had another edition this year, and probably we found out that conventions can be run in a different way, and then we see that more and more conventions are doing that. We were not probably the first, but I don't. It's not important. It's important to that we all, with all our networks, create these positive experiences for everybody. The more inclusive they are, the better they are, because now we can leverage the accessibility and the almost zero cost of the network, and that we should really persist in that.
Yes, and Janet's been a part of doing that right here for us. With,
this is our second virtual Octocon. When we realized last year the way things were headed, and some of us had sort of figured it out in February and March, and this isn't a flu. No, it looks like what we're heading into is definitely 6 to 9 months of stay at home. We were like, okay, so we cannot run our convention. So we decided that we would move it online and then see what tools are available. And we're very lucky that we had people who use Twitch and said, okay, we can do a certain amount with Twitch. So this is our second year running online. It has been great for accessibility. We have people from 5 continents. We don't have the Arctic or Antarctica, but we have everybody else. And it's amazing to see the number of people that are taking part, the people who've been able to, this is their first convention, or this is their first time to get involved with Octocon, the Irish convention. And then we had people saying that they enjoyed it so much last year, we wanted to keep doing something. So we did one event, one panel every month. And one of those was Oisín's when his book came out, so that we would have, people had something to look forward and something to do. In terms of things that I've done myself, well, over the last 5 years, I've got 2 millennials. They can both be quite teenagery and sometimes quite nihilistic. And I've had to say, well, like Terry Pratchett would say, a lie can get around the world before the truth has its boots on. That bad news sells, and bad news is what people share, and bad news is what's on timelines. But to actually look at what's happening globally, poverty is coming down, deaths to hunger consistently been coming down, child mortality has consistently coming down, vaccination rates for the majority of childhood illnesses are going up, education has been getting better, that we tend to see the bad things, and the bad things was what makes the news. But globally, those statistics come out every year. Or when I see good news, I would make a point of sharing it in my networks. It got pretty grim after Christmas. Continuously, somewhere around the world was always on fire. Oh my God, what the hell? But I found that made it even more important. But I found that it's also made me look at global supply lines. Long before that big ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, we were looking, long before Brexit, we had to feel the bite of Brexit and what's happening with supply lines, is looking at, if I'm going to be at home and I'm going to be staying at home and I'm minimizing my risks, then what local suppliers are there? Who can locally deliver? And to see local businesses booming during this time, one of them particularly is a Sourdough and Beyond is a local small bakery, and they've expanded and taken on 2 extra full-time staff, but they only deliver in the section of the city, the suburb that I'm in. And they're happy to do that. And even then you will wait 2 to 3 days for the bread, but it is excellent bread and it's what their capacity is and it's local. So I do think we need to look at how far things are traveling to get us. What do we actually need? Is it more, why is it not sustainable to buy local? Why are carrots from Israel, which I wouldn't buy anyway, because I believe in apartheid restrictions on Israel because they are an occupying oppressive state. But why are carrots that have to come all the way from Israel cheaper from carrots that come down the road in County Dublin? And the global issues can be overwhelming, but we can vote all with our pockets. We can actually make those changes. And I've seen local supermarkets, which are part of a global change, reduce the amount of plastic. They brought back paper bags. Used to go to the greengrocer or the shops when I was younger. You go to buy fruit, they'd be putting a way to put in a brown paper bag, which is recyclable. That's starting to come back. So, saying to my children that you can make a difference. And we have seen big social change in this country in the last 20 years. In terms of not only the colonial oppression that Ireland has gone through, very much the state handing over so many of our services to the Roman Catholic Church and that going unquestioned and them having huge social power, that has dramatically changed. Particularly over the last 5 years, we've had a number of referendum, which are the people saying, no, people have the right to healthcare. People have the right to choose their own destiny. People have the right to marry the people they love, regardless of their gender. So there are things that I find are really hopeful. they're things that I encourage and I speak to my children about, and they speak to their peers. I speak to my nieces and nephews about, because they're the things that we can make a change, a difference on. Bigger corporations, that's a bit harder, but seeing the difference every day. And I also think a lot of people started with the grow your own at home over the last 2 years, and they see how long it takes to get a pound of tomatoes to grow in the back garden, and how many tomatoes they would eat normally over the summer, and the difference between being able to get a crop of 3 pounds of tomatoes and they'd go through them in a week compared to what is needed to grow. And that grow your own sustainability has made people realize, yes, growing your own plot of land is great, even plotting out your gardens. Get rid of the lawn. The lawn does nothing. Grow something that's sustainable. Get involved with your community gardens. But that only explains to us how much we need that on a bigger scale. That our country doesn't, still imports too much food, and food can be grown here. And like I said, you can vote with your pocket and try and make a difference that way. So that's where I find hope, and that's the hopeful discussions I'd have.
Wonderful. My goodness, I think we could have run an entire panel just on that one question. Well, let's kind of move to, we're at a science fiction convention. Let's move to our fiction and talk about how our fiction isn't just escapist, that it's about thinking about ideas, about working through ideas and thinking what the consequences might be of the choices that we make, of the technologies that we might avail ourselves of, the social changes that we should be working towards to the extent that we can. So I'm just going to loop around and ask Francesco to kind of talk in terms of the storytelling side of this moment.
Okay. No, I think science fiction has it has a responsibility, but it doesn't really. I mean, not limited to science fiction. It's in general. It's fiction. It's telling stories. I mean, the idea of communicating a meaning, something meaningful to somebody else. I mean, you write a book because you have something to share. You probably have a vision of the reality. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to, create a consistent world building or a consistent conflict or these kind of things. So when it comes to storytelling, I think that science fiction as not just the pointing the finger, like so much of the post-apocalyptic or dystopian narratives we've seen over the last 30 years, from the post-atomic scenarios to the grim, dark cyberpunk, cyber surveillance and these kind of things. But it has also a kind of not inspiring in the sense of hopeful, because hope is fine, but as I said yesterday in a panel, hope is an heteronymous term. It means that hope depends on factors and elements that are outside of yourself. So I would like to create a storytelling that puts autonomy, puts, as Jan said, grow it in your own country's backyard, or provide a toolbox of ideas and actions you could actually do and change and start transforming your life. So, for example, I don't know, I've written many stories about this. So I'm just thinking about what would be the most suitable one. Let's say that in a novel, a solar punk novel, because the kind of food that we are actually given at the moment, living in the cities for let's say 100 years of industrial food, we are given this kind of industrial food, and it's junk food basically. If you turn around every label in supermarket, I'm not talking about the farm and groceries and stuff. I'm talking about what normal person gets on a weekly basis. They can access the easy food, the fast food, the kind of things that it's junk food. So in this book, I kind of used nanotechnology to create nanomachines that can assemble proteins, vitamins, and carbohydrates in order to kind of give up this kind of sick habit, this biological heritage that we have that is not providing any actually good at the moment, because we see that this food is creating obesity, is creating diabetes, is creating all the diseases that we have is because of the intake of food. So these kind of people, they, instead of eating 3 times a day, they eat once a month. And how does that, how does their life change? And they start to 3D print some of the tools that they need on a daily basis, and they kind of get out of the system and start to walk. That's why the book is called The Walkers. And walking in cities is one of the most forbidden actions, because the city is in the hands of cars, because cars, they pay bills, because they pay insurance, because they are the icon of our society. So walking, if you consider where you have to walk, how you have to walk, you are given times, you are kind of not very welcome in the city as a walker. And because, you basically don't pay, and you are just using the space that is sold by corporations to all these automatic systems. It so is a kind of action that's a kind of provocative idea of, let's try to fight back and let's try to put some punk into a sustainable kind of life. And that was my, let's say, contribution to a kind of revolutionary storytelling in a way.
That's fun. So, Oisín, do you have some books to recommend, or storytelling themes that you think are important?
Just going back to a point that Francesco made when he's talking about the importance of getting together and conventions and kind of getting people back, into talking to each other and having more social events. I was reminded of a story that Neil Gaiman told a while back, where he was invited to a convention in China, and it was a state-sponsored convention. Mm-hmm. And when he asked one of the organizers, why is the state sponsoring a science fiction convention, he was told that when they wanted to inspire more innovators, they went around to all the tech companies in the West and they said, what inspired you? What informed your background? And the one thing that kept coming up was they read science fiction when they were growing up. So it's not necessarily that we always have to be sharing kind of really unique ideas, or that we have to constantly be coming up with new concepts, although obviously that's why we get into it. But it's also the fact that it's this constant reach into the future, that we're thinking about it, and then we're kind of, we're trying to conceive what it would be like there, and not just in terms of ideas. I mean, if you look at the way Asimov wrote discussions, really. He wrote concepts, but I never thought he was a great storyteller. It might be kind of really offending some people now, because quite often there'd be conversations and discussion of stuff. But actually, for me, the best storytelling of the future is where the writer makes you feel what it's like to be there. You experience what that future might be like. And it might not be a really conceptually important aspect of the future, but we're putting you forward, you're projecting yourself forward into it. One of my early books, I think it was 2005, I wrote a book called Small-Minded Giants. And it's set in a kind of in like a hollowed out mountain under a glass dome. And the rest of the world had frozen, as opposed to I knew global warming was coming. It suited the plot that the world was frozen. But it meant that everything inside this dome was all the resources they had. They had nothing else. They couldn't come up with anything new. So, you'd have dust in the place, and everything that dust represented was stuff that was lost, So even like the wearing out of the soles of your shoes, that was a resource that was steadily being lost. They were going to run out of the materials they needed to make shoes, and they didn't have a lot of nanotech. It was kind of 21st century science built into a rock. And I wanted that sense of, we have to conserve everything we have because everything is going to run out at some point. You know, the machine's keeping this, like the whole city was built into a machine, and the machine was keeping everybody alive. And I think that's the way we need to think about our Earth, as in we think about its limits. And that doesn't mean that we have to be particularly conceptually brilliant. You only have to think about the stuff around you that breaks or wears down, and you think about, right, what if you didn't have the means to replace that? We make shoes that are kind of soft and very comfortable, but they wear down really quickly. We make so many things like this, and I think sometimes it's just taking one little aspect of life. And I think for me, that's always the most exciting thing about science fiction, is the lens that you use to look at things. We say, right, I'm just going to isolate this aspect of life, and I want to look at it. And let's really think about what would happen if we changed one thing, or we moved in a different direction. So for me, that's the importance of science fiction, is that lens, and fantasy as well. I mean, I always think, we talk about the two different things, but they're really kind of interrelated. It's hard to separate them. But it's the idea of taking an existing idea and shifting it, or giving it a new emphasis, or changing in some way so that we examine the idea. And that to me is it's one of the most attractive and appealing things about science fiction, but it's also for me one of the most useful and valuable things about it, is that means of projecting ourselves into a particular future, and having a look at what that would be like to live in.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful perspective. Janet, I want to give you a chance before somebody starts pinging me. We're getting short of time.
What Oisín was talking about clothes and the shoes wearing down and the shoes not being replaceable, and how the right to repair movement is getting stronger. We should have the right to repair things. And that also applies to clothes, so fast fashion. So I grew up on the eldest in my family, but my mother was not. So I had plenty of clothes that were delivered down. A black plastic bag would arrive, or a net bag would arrive with clothes in it, shoes that still had somewhere in them, coats or stuff that could be adjusted. So fast fashion needs to die. But I think one of the problems we have is very much the Vimes economic theory of boots. You can buy a cheap meal to feed 2 adults and 3 forked children for $5, and it's a bag of frozen chips and it's a large frozen pizza. Nutritionally, it's not good, but it will fill their bellies. But the costing to actually do chicken and 3 vegetables at a starch for that same family has a much higher cost, not only in the money out of your pocket, but the time and the labor. So there are an awful lot of people then who don't know how to cook from scratch, because it's expensive, because what you buy goes off, and if you need to buy something, if you don't have the herbs and you don't have the spices and you don't have a liter of oil, well, all you need is a teaspoon. That's very much the level edge of poverty that a lot of people are living on. So that has to change. I could go out and buy a food processor, and I could buy one in my local German discount store for €60, and it'll break in 2-3 years. If I want to buy a top of the range fancy ones that come in limited colors and are mostly made of metal and will last me, like my mother's one has lasted her 30 years, I'm going to have to pay up to maybe 10 times that amount. So there's the inequality of sustainability is an issue that we also have to deal with. That while we want to practically live a more sustainable life and marshal our resources, we have to look at the inequalities of accessibility to those things. My local community centre does a tool library that you don't have to have a lawnmower. There are 2 lawnmowers owned by the community, and if you need to cut your grass, you can borrow one. If you don't have a shears, you can borrow a community shears. So there's that type of sharing and community, but I think is really important. In terms of what Oisín was saying about talking to the younger generations, my favorite headlines for the last 3 to 5 years are millennials are ruining whatever. So as much as people are for the marketplace of ideas, and the marketplace of ideas, things will either work or they won't. But they spend a lot of money propping up things that clearly aren't working because millennials aren't interested. Millennials, by the way, are people who are up as 30, 35. They're not all in their early 20s. It's quite a great job. But if millennials are ruining something, then it's either out of their economic bracket, they're not going to be buying the 300 kitchen mixer, or it doesn't fit with the way they're living their lives. So there's an awful lot of things I think that are being held on to. I think we see, I love my parents, they're of the boomer generation. They remember having to make and do and patch clothes. I think my mum said she would rather never do that again. And I can understand that, how that is seen as generational poverty. But then again, vintage clothes, if you have the money, vintage clothes are the way to go, particularly designer vintage stuff, which lasts. So it's, again, we need to look at where we spend our money, how we spend our money, where is the equal access, and to start sharing the stories and put in your stories, they had a mortar and pestle, which was their great grannies, and that's the prized possession. Not necessarily the shiny tablet, but the mortar and pestle. Or to say that they remember when the grandmother used to go and buy rosemary in the supermarket in plastic that couldn't be recycled. When, you know, not even just in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, rosemary grows everywhere. If you know what it looks like, you're never going to be 2 miles usually if you're in, you know, a temperate environment from rosemary going somewhere in somebody's garden. And if you ask them, they're usually sick of it being in the garden and they will give you some. So I think foraging as well. And I don't think those types of stories have to be within a dystopia, that we can weave them through other narratives. And I think the collective and the sharing as well is part of it. The nuclear family is such a toxic concept that 2 adults and 2 children are all that's needed. We say it takes a village, it takes a community, and the local community coming together over the pandemic has made a big difference to my life and to my neighbours, from checking in on neighbours and making sure, do people have food, from doing stuff for the children to do. We organised to get some money together and deliver chalks for drawing on the pavements to all the children, and then had competitions. So and then the children could walk around the estate and see each other's art. We had teddy bear walks where people put teddy bears and different displays in their windows. And then the children could go around and count how many red teddy bears, the most unusual teddy bear, was there an octopus, was there a unicorn? And that's community spirit and community resilience. And I think we need to write them in as many stories as possible and not just science fiction. It's wonderful to think replicators from Star Trek will come and will all 3D print food. But the replicator isn't the magical doohickey. It's the warp core that provides the energy for free. Solar power is getting there, and solar power has made huge jumps. Particularly, you know, I live in Ireland. It rains actively 1/3 of the year. We have an awful lot of cloud cover. And so most solar powers, until the most recent generations, the panels were only good for possibly heating water. We've now got solar panels come to the stage where even on a cloudy day, we will get some electricity generated. And I remember my kids being 10 and saying, why don't all the schools and hospitals have solar panels on them? And it's taken 10 years, but we're slowly getting there. But it means listening to children, making them ask questions. And that's something we all can do every day. Where does this come from? Where does it grow? Where could we get it? What do we do with it? And that's the everyday storytelling I think we need to encourage everyone to do and encourage kids to do.
Yeah, so if we're telling each other stories all the time as we move forward, we will together as a community help build our optimistic future. And this has been a wonderful panel, and we are down to our last minute. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask for one story, one book. It doesn't have to be sci-fi. It doesn't have to be fantasy, that you think people should pick up and read. I dare you. Francesco.
Can I go first and do a really quick, really old one? You're talking about hope and you're talking about resilience. So
yes,
I spent the last 13 months out of work with long COVID. I'm one of those people who has fatigue and heart palpitations, and I'm very not well, and I'm marshalling my resource to be here. And when it comes to resilience and hating the world and not liking the cards you're dealt in this world and trying to find a way to deal with it, I go right back to something that I read very young when I was 9, and that's What Katie Did. And I don't mean it in an ableist way, as in you change your attitude and your world becomes easy. But, you know, when you are restricted and there are limits on what you can do, if you're lucky, you will be able to make the attitude adjustment and make the small changes. There'll be days when all you want to do is cry and stay in bed. And God knows everybody's had days like that over the last 2 years. But the day where we have the fortitude to make those changes on a small level, that's what we gradually build on and build ourselves back up. And that's a very old book, but there's lessons there for everyone, that it doesn't necessarily have to be sci-fi.
Excellent. Thank you. Guys? Francesco, do you have a thought?
Well, I was thinking, and I would like to suggest, because we're talking about global, this is Analog Virtual is a wonderful sci-fi book from an Indian young writer, and she's very talented, Lavanya Lakshminarayan. And this book is set in Bangalore, in the future Bangalore in India, and it tells about the clash between the, let's say, virtual technocratic society and the analogic community that is kind of sustaining the virtual community with their, work and agriculture and all these things. But one day, these two things will have to come to terms, and it's a very interesting scenario. And I really appreciate it, and I really suggest that people should read it.
Excellent. Oisín, you're next.
Well, I'm going to be presumptuous and kind of recommend my own book, because that's basically why I wrote it. A short hope about climate change. It's written with a narrative arc, and I wanted it to I mean, as Francesco says, I mean, hope, is no good on its own. There has to be a reason to feel it. And I really wanted people to feel that there was an entire world out there of like a world of people who are already acting and have been acting for a long time, and particularly for young people, that they're not getting on at the first stop. This is a moving train, and there's an awful lot of people involved. I mean, have been doing amazing things all over the world. So I think there's great hope to be had out there, but it's hope because people are taking action. Whether you're a teenager protesting on the streets or a scientist working on trying to regrow coral reefs, there's so much stuff going on. And I think it's very inspiring thing to be part of. And I think we might look back on this period as it could be our greatest, period of change, where we basically, I think it's a war we win by doing good. But we should be treating it as on that scale. We should be kind of reacting on that scale.
That's true. We did take global action as much as we could to ban CFCs and do something about the holes turning up in the ozone layer.
And that's one of the things mentioned in the book.
Yes.
All these things where we decided to act as a species for our planet, and I think there are a lot of reasons to have hope for that.
That is a wonderful tagline, I think, for this panel. A war will win by doing good. And I would like to ask everybody to run to the Discord after and put your recommendations in there so that people can find them statically. It's hard to pick it up sometimes when you're just listening to the program. But this has been, I think we're out of time. I haven't gotten my actual cutoff notice, but my clock is kind of screaming at me over here.
I'm afraid I won't be able to make the Discord. I have to run off again. It's been a busy Saturday. So, but
yes,
thank
you know what, Oisín, I'll link to your book.
Yes, we can do it for you.
Thank you very much. Both. It's been a really interesting talk.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This was a wonderful panel. And I hope to see everybody who's interested in chatting more over on the Discord. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the afternoon or the evening or the night, whatever this is.
Bye.
Wherever you are.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Bye.